Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Social Work Votes, a podcast bringing you the latest on voting, politics, and updates from social workers to social workers. I'm Sarah Jamgotch, and I'm here with a few of my great friends and colleagues, Danielle London and Raldina Breddy. Hi, Danny and Dina.
Hi, Sarah.
Hey.
How you guys doing today?
Doing good. How about you?
Good. So, what is Social Work Votes? What are we doing?
Okay, great. So I can take that one, Sarah. So Social Work Votes is an initiative to get social workers out in the communities they serve, empowering the populations they work with to be politically active, politically involved, and to get us as social workers involved, getting folks voting, getting folks registered to vote, and helping to do what we can to break down some of those barriers put in place to stop people from voting and get them out into the ballot box.
Yeah, awesome. Sounds like something we definitely need right now.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Have you guys always thought that voting is important as social workers?
I can answer that. So, as a social worker and a recent graduate, I think that with the current climate and everything, social workers have an ethical duty to be informed about politics and to be also influencing the policy that they're implementing at the micro and all the levels, honestly, the macro, meso level as well. So, yeah, I've always thought that voting was important, and I think it's going to always be very important for social workers.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like now more than ever we need to be out there, and it affects everything. Um, I think, in this podcast we're going to cover a couple of big Supreme Court cases that happened over this last week, as well as the voting mess that happened in Georgia as well. But before we get started, what would you want our listeners to know if you could speak to them?
Yeah, I would say one big thing is I'd want listeners to know that it's really important to talk to people around you about voting. Make sure your friends and family are registered to vote. Check your voter registration and don't ever take that for granted or assume that it's all good because we all know the voter purges and things like that happen. So check your voter registration, make sure your friends and family are checking theirs, and do what you can to keep the conversation always going about getting people involved.
Yeah. How about you, Dina? Anything you want your listeners
Yeah,
to know?
I definitely want to emphasize everything that Danielle said, and also just to do your own research. Don't wait for the information to be brought to you. There are a lot of people trying to frame certain things different ways for their own agenda. So make sure that you know what's important to you and who will be advocating for those specific topics and issues.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. So, for our first episode, we want to bring everyone up to speed on politics and voting, as well as why we as social workers should be talking about it. Today, we'll hear from a special guest on whether being politically engaged is a social worker's responsibility. Hint, it is. We'll also talk about some of the biggest Supreme Court cases this year and what this means for social workers. Okay, so now we're taking a little break. Okay. The Latino Leadership Institute, in collaboration with Columbia School of Social Work, brings you this podcast. Jaime, it's so great to have you. How you doing today?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This is great. Great idea.
Yeah, so we have a lot to cover on this podcast today, but first we want to know, why are we reaching out to social workers? Why did you get involved in this campaign?
Well, basically,
Oh, we can't hear you. Could you check your USB at the bottom, like plugged in to the computer? Of course, it goes right out as we start. Still can't hear you. Nothing. Mm-mm. Oh yeah. Did you click is this blue?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems that when it was on the floor, I stepped on it.
Okay.
You wanna start again?
Yeah, sure. So first we need to know, why are you involved in this campaign? Why are we reaching out to social workers?
Well, basically, the social work profession is the profession that, of all the professions in the academic area, is the one that basically concentrate on the empowerment of the people, psychologically and socially and culturally and politically. Many of the struggles that social work confronted at the beginning during the end of the 19th century were basically social issues and issues of political empowerment. So that's where we come from.
Mm-hmm.
The profession has diversified itself, now concentrates a lot on clinical psychology and clinical social work, but the macro aspect of the profession is still there. So we're doing exactly what the school social work was created for, was basically to empower people. And by empowering people, we can also heal people, you know, through organizing, through making sure that we work in the collective. The United States is a very individualistic country, and it comes from the Constitution of the United States and even before the Constitution of the United States. So it tries to concentrate on the individual, not on the collective.
Mm-hmm.
And voting basically deals with the individual, but also deals with the collective, and social work basically deals with both. So if there is a profession that can maneuver between different spectrums in society and also help to heal people uh, psychologically, but also collectively, is social work. So this is perfect for the profession. This is something that it should be natural for social workers to be involved in in reaching out to people and getting people out to vote and to participate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It sounds like, as the profession has grown, that we've sort of diverged into only macro and only micro. So why do you think that we've sort of created this dissonance between the two? And is there a place for, micro and macro to kind of come together again in terms of voting?
Yes, that's a good question, and I like that question always, because there has been a separation in terms of the role. It's like a fork, and the micro and the macro have isolated themselves, but especially in the micro aspect. Uh, there is no reason why they shouldn't work together. As an organizer, uh, I have seen healing in people who have worked in empowering themselves in issues in the community. For example, I have organized tenants, and after 6 months or a year of working together, when we accomplished the goals that we had, you could see a transformation in the psychic of those individuals that were working in that specific organizing project. And they healed themselves because they empowered themselves. By empowering themselves in that process, they understand that they can change circumstances that before oppressed them. And organizing is healing and is therapeutic.
Mm-hmm.
It's as therapeutic as going to therapy. I'm not discarding therapy. Therapy is extremely important. There are issues that are completely in the realm of the individual that you have to deal with. But I always have this sentence that I use in one of my plays, which is, do you think that slaves in the South would have felt better about slavery if they had therapy 3 times a week? So that's the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And,
The issue is not therapy the alternative, is the elimination of slavery. Now, we don't have slavery, but we have oppression, we have discrimination. So those things create trauma too.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, social work has abandoned that and believes that anything that has to do with organizing is not therapeutic. And what we have created is basically a bourgeoisie type of clinical approach where people who have their material needs satisfied can benefit from that clinical aspect. People who are poor, who lives in buildings that in which they don't get enough electricity, that the landlord don't repair, doesn't make repairs. People who are being oppressed or discriminated racially and politically, that creates trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But 3 times a week of therapy is not going to help that.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be a merge between the macro and the micro. There is no reason why that merge shouldn't exist. But at this point, that's where we are. And again, I think that we're suffering from a bourgeoisie type of psychology that is being used, that that is oriented to uh, clients that have the material needs satisfied, and that clinical aspect can be effective with that type of population.
Yeah.
But it's leaving out everybody else. I'm sorry that the answer is so long, but the question, I think it was very good, and I like to talk about that.
Yeah, it's a complicated question, and it takes. Yeah, it's okay if
Well,
it's long.
well, for those of you who have taken classes with me, this is not the first time I say this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Danielle, Dina, do you guys have any follow-ups or anything like that?
No.
No. Okay. Do you think, Jaime, that we have like a duty to be involved politically? I think a lot of social workers kind of shy away from politics. So why do you think we shy away, and should we?
Well, I think it's because what I said before, there has been a deviation from the original principles of social work. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be contradictory. I think that there should be a merger on that. But right now, in terms of voting, there is a lot of people who are in trauma because of policies that have been created during the last 4 years. And even before,
Mm-hmm.
policy creates trauma. Policy can be healing.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to operate in both. Now, the social work profession is the most progressive profession that exists.
It's an interesting thought. Yeah.
We are, yes, social workers are the most progressive. For example, in Columbia University, etc., you have the School of Political Science, you have SIPA, School of International Affairs, law schools, business, etc., etc. Where, by definition, social work is a progressive, liberal entity, and there shouldn't be contradictions with that.
Gotcha. I have no other questions on that. We can move on to the next topic, unless you guys have something else. This also can be like edited and like cut out, by the way. So,
okay.
Any other thoughts?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. We will be right back. There's going to be some music then. Okay. Do you guys want to take on topic 2 then? I'll take a step back. I've been talking too much.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we're going to slide into a little bit of some recent news that came out. We had 2 very important SCOTUS cases that touched on 2 really important and relevant issues, especially as social workers, which were civil rights discrimination for LGBTQIA+ folks in the workplaces and the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program for immigrant children. So I can maybe start with the LGBTQ case. I don't know, Jaime, would you like to give an overview of the case?
Well, basically, the case was based on whether you can discriminate in the workplace on the basis of sex. Now, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 basically states that you cannot discriminate in terms of race, gender, sex, etc. Now, 1964 was a long time ago, so their view of what they were not thinking so much in terms of um, the LGBTQ community. Even that concept didn't exist the way we use it today. However, it's very clear in the legislation that you cannot discriminate in terms of race. I mean, and sex. So in the workplace. And unfortunately, the administration that we have at the federal level basically thought that the LGBTQ community didn't have any protections at the workplace. So the case ended up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, in a surprising decision, that it was 6-3, and one of the Trump's appointees have friends pronouncing his last name, Gorvich, basically went in favor, and with John Roberts, in favor of basically making sure that you cannot discriminate in the workplace based on sexual orientation. And we're in the year 2020. Is shameful that we have to enter 2020 to have such a decision. It shouldn't have been even an issue in court whatsoever, but that's where we are. And to say that that was surprising is, to me, something that is embarrassing. It shouldn't be surprising that in the year 2020, there is a decision in favor of the LGBTQ community, and say that that was a surprising decision. So that's where we are with that. I don't think that that is going to be repealed, or it's going to be another case is going to be brought in on this issue. But there was another decision that, and I let you do the introduction for that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that great overview of the case. I was hoping we could talk a little bit also about what we can do as social workers to uphold this decision, and also thinking about the decision in the larger social context, right? Because as a queer person, I can't be fired at work for being queer, but if I'm working somewhere with at-will employment, I could be fired, for not fitting in with the company culture. Or if I'm working somewhere that doesn't have a union bargaining agreement or something like that, I could be fired for other reasons not pertaining to my sexual orientation. So could you, Jaime, Dina, Sarah, if you also have ideas on what we can do as social workers to uphold this decision in light of the sort of current labor situation and lack of some labor rights policies?
I wait for anyone else that want to jump in. If not, I go ahead. You see, like I said before, but I want to emphasize this. The other ability of social workers is the fact that we can merge with many other professions and career. For example, I became a lawyer after I was a social worker. And the reason was because I wanted to be a more effective social worker. It's not because I wanted to be a lawyer. When I used to organize many, many years ago, most of the time, I had to go to lawyers to tell me whether I should do this or I shouldn't do that. So I decided, well, I'm going to stop asking lawyers about this. So I'm going to become a lawyer. So one of the things that people can do at the workplace is basically to understand the rights and not being afraid of bringing those claims to the employer and taking them to court. Now, that's why at Columbia we have a course on social work and the law, which I taught once, and also at NYU. There is another class that is called social work and the law. And at Columbia, it's Legal Foundations one for those who are doing the dual program with the law school. So that is extremely important. That is a must. I think that every social worker should take that class. It should be a requirement because that is a tool that in the macro aspect is extremely important, knowing the law or knowing your rights and knowing how to argue it, not only in the workplace, but also if you have clients. I remember when I was a social worker, I went to a couple of hearings on Social Security disabilities. And I didn't know what I was doing. But social workers are the ones that go to Social Security disability. They go to welfare agencies representing their clients, and they don't know how to represent their clients unless they have a mini course. I mean, we can do that more often at the School of Social Work. So the students come with some knowledge about the law. But if you are discriminated, get a lawyer, but you don't know the power that you have. For example, one of the things in your example, Danielle, is that you have to document everything because they want to get rid of you because you are gay. But they are not going to come straight and tell you that that's why they want to discriminate against you or want to get rid of you. Mm-hmm. They are going to give all these different excuses. So what you have to do is to document everything that is happening, and then you make the connection by using all those facts, because it's the story of the story that you have to create. And you're not creating it, it's the reality. You know what is really happening. But for example, in racial discriminations, it's the same thing. You know, we're not getting rid of you or we're paying you less, also in gender, because you're a woman or because you're African American or you're Latino, you know, and we're not promoting you. It's just that we have a criteria that is neutral and applies to everybody. But then you see the results of who's getting promoted, who's getting fired, who's not. When you put all that information together, you can show under the Civil Rights Act that even when there was no intent, mm-hmm. the results tells you that there was an intent. Mm-hmm. The impact of those decisions show you an intent. And then you can argue that and you can make the claims that you have to make. So that's why it's important to be prepared. But my advice is document everything that is happening.
Yeah, it also sounds like just being informed, you know, as well on these decisions too, as social workers.
Yes, exactly. That's why it's wise that you guys decided to bring this, even when we're talking about elections and voting, because the reason why we vote is to change policy and to improve policy. So why does it have to go to the Supreme Court to decide something as simple and as humane as these two issues of LGBTQ rights at the workplace and the rights of DACA students? And, you know, we don't have to go through that in a normal, humane society. And I think that we are. But sometimes we have to deal with that policy and change it.
Yes, definitely. And I think it's also important both with DACA and with the queer cases to think about it like you were talking about in this society. Like I think it's really important to mention that when this case was decided that same week, two Black transgender women were killed, Dominique Fells and Rhea Milton. And so I think it sort of brings this question of, this policy is a really great, exciting win, but what happens when we still have like Black transgender women having an average life expectancy of like 35 years? And, you know, how can we start to create a culture shift and policy shifts so that that stops happening? And I think we're seeing a bit of a similar exciting win, but still with this larger issue at hand for the community with the DACA case, and thinking about what a great win it is, but also thinking about people still in ICE detention centers and things like that, and ICE still being active and at large. So if we could talk maybe a little bit about what the DACA case is, why it's an exciting win, what rights it's helping to restore, and then also, you know, what comes next, and how again, as social workers, we can continue to support this work, and especially when we're serving immigrant communities.
Great. DACA is basically the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals that was created under the Obama administration. And basically, it has to be renewed every 2 years. And it allows children that were not born in the United States, but came to the United States when they were very young, and they only know the United States as their country, even when they are not officially citizens. And it has been very successful. More than 80% of Americans, Democrats and Republicans, that's 80%, support DACA. Why this ended up again in court? Well, it wasn't the people who put it in court. It was the government, the federal government, especially the White House, took it to court. Another surprising decision that shouldn't be surprising. This one was 5-4. When we were talking about discrimination in terms of sex, it was 6-3. But now, and that was surprising, very surprising. So now this one was 5-4. And it was even more surprising because with this court, which is a very conservative court, people thought that it was going to be 6-3 against it. Now, this decision is very good temporarily. The decision written by Justice Roberts did not use the main issue in the case. Which was the 14th Amendment and equal protection. That basically says that you cannot discriminate in terms of race. And the action by the administration was conceived as an action that it was based on race in discriminatory against these students. So he didn't decide on that. So people have to be a little bit concerned. I'm concerned. I'm glad that it was decided in favor of the DACA students, but this can come back again because it was not decided on the issue at hand. It was decided on the fact, according to Roberts, who wrote the decision, it was decided on the fact that the administration didn't explain clearly the reason why they were terminating DACA. So it's shoddy lawyering. That's what Robert said. The lawyering was bad. We don't understand why you make this decision. Therefore, we're not going to go ahead in this. So in other words, what he said, go back, bring it back later, and make your case more clear. The decision was based on a standard, which is the issue of arbitrary and capricious, not on the 14th Amendment equal protection. If it had been on the 14th Amendment equal protection, this issue would be dead completely, and they wouldn't bring it up again. But he didn't decide on that. So that was very smart for a conservative not to look bad. And he has done this before. once he went in favor of Obamacare as a conservative, and he used the 10th Amendment in order, but that's another story. But he has done that before. And then after that, he made some horrible decisions in other cases. Now, this is my take. Let me complicate this a little bit more. Based on Robert's history, it's like he gives liberals one or two cases, and then the big one, we have an abortion case coming next week. And that's the one that I'm just afraid that he has given liberals two cases, one that can return, by the way, and he will vote for it, vote against DACA on the equal protection if it comes again. And then basically to mitigate the impact of a decision against abortion rights, about pro-choice, right? And that's my fear. I hope I'm wrong. But Roberts has a history of basically leaning against, or at least implying that he's not that happy with Roe versus Wade. Hopefully, he will surprise us again, because there is no way that that Alito, Thomas, Kavanaugh, the usual suspects are going to, they are going to go after Roe versus Wade. And Roberts has a history of that. So my fear is that this decision that has been so good for liberals is just to mitigate the effect that a decision that basically is going to eliminate the right to choose is going to have. But that's me in my paranoia. And following the history of Roberts in the court. Hopefully, I will be wrong. I will be happy to be wrong about that. But I think that that's why DACA, and DACA can return. Now, if there is a change of administration, because they won't be able to bring it before November. Remember, the decisions usually come in June next year. So they're going to bring DACA again. But if this administration remain in power, then you will see DACA coming back and being completely destroyed, because Roberts basically told them, this is the way you bring DACA for us to approve it. Just do it the way I'm telling you, and it's going to be approved. Not this way. So that's my take on DACA and Roe versus Wade, which you didn't ask me, but we will see next week.
We will. Yep. Any other questions, Danielle?
I don't think so. I think that was a great, I don't know, segue pointing out of why it's so important for us to be focusing on voting when there's so many issues happening all around us, and sometimes it can feel very overwhelming. How sort of like focusing on policymakers and change makers can help to bring about a world of change.
You see, the law can destroy social work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If we let it happen. Policies can destroy social work. And there is a history in the world of things like that. Remember, social work is activism at the individual level and also at the group level. And that's why I say to my clinicians, the social worker clinicians, is, you need to get out of that office and join the rest of the social workers on the streets, because the policies that are going to be created in the future are going to make our job at the individual level and at the collective level more and more difficult.
Yeah. All right. Up next, we will talk about the voting mess that happened in Georgia that led to hundreds of uncounted votes. Let's take a break. Okay. Okay. Dina, would you like to take this section? Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so welcome back. So we're going to be talking about voting suppression and the mess that happened in Georgia with like hundreds of uncounted voices. So voting suppression in Georgia and voter suppression around the world is the topic. There was a mess at the Georgia polls last week, with some Black and brown neighborhoods reporting waits up to 8 hours at some polls. And we know how that can be an issue for even people who don't have access to transportation, ableism, or different types of like resources that they may not have. So even showing up is can be a hard thing for them. So getting there and having to wait up to 8 hours, what do you think could be helpful in alleviating this type of suppression, Jaime?
Well, one of the things that we can do as social workers is basically, first is the legal aspect that I already talk about that, but also in terms of training ourselves as people who can protect the vote the day of the election. Most of the voter suppression, I know that there is an issue of message. I know message is part of voter suppression. And that message is out there. It's a message that basically deviates from reality in order to make sure that people get confused and all that. That happens in every election. And both parties do it, and candidates do it, depending on what their interests or what population they want to make sure that they're confused. So this is not a unique of one party. Both parties do it. One party does it more than the others. But it's on election day that those things are materialized. For example, what happened in Georgia is what happened Democrats do in New York. They change the polling site and they don't let you know. And then you go to the polling site that you have been voting for 2 or 3 elections, which is near your house, and now you find out that they put you in another place, or that the machines break out of nowhere. So your electoral district where you vote, that machine is no longer there because it broke or is, you know. So Georgia has a history like many states in the United States, but Georgia, just when Stacey Abrams was running for governor, and this is one of the funniest thing and sad things about voting suppression. The funny thing is that the person who's now the governor of Georgia was the lieutenant governor of Georgia. And the lieutenant governor, usually in every state, is the one that controls the board of election in the state. So he ran for governor, still without resigning to his position of lieutenant governor, meaning that he's the guy counting the votes on his election. And he was supposed to resign. It was expected. That was the ethical thing to do. How can you run for governor and then be in charge of the board of elections? So what happened in that election was that there was a purge of voters that started a year and a half before the election under his direction, that basically purged African American voters out. One of the excuses is that if you haven't voted, they create a legislation. See, this is policy. They create legislation that basically says, if you haven't voted in the last 2 elections, we're going to take you out. And then they start looking. And then, because it's administratively, so it's very difficult to prove, but the results 1 year after he became governor, and you find that it was basically African American neighborhoods where they were purging the votes out. This is not new. This goes back to the 19th century. These are tactics that are old. and they continue happening. So they changed the site. The other thing is that they close sites at the last moment. They say, oh no, we couldn't use this site for whatever reason. There is a plumbing issue in the bathroom. And they look for any excuse just to close the site where they know that the other party is going to have a majority presence in that place. So that's what happened in Georgia. Then they delay the vote inside. Machine breaks, or they take it easy, they slow down the process. So you have all these lines and people waiting for 4 hours. That it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen. So voting suppression is American apple pie. It's like American apple pie. There is nothing that is more American apple pie than voting suppression. The history of voting in the United States is the history of voting suppression. Because without voting suppression, there will be no history of voting. It will be very simple. You just go vote and go home. That's the history. But there is volumes on voting in the United States because those volumes are basically concentrated in suppressing the vote, not facilitating the vote. And it's happening in the different states. Gerrymandering, we can talk about gerrymandering, how they create districts in which they pack districts with people from one party, and then they distribute with less people, they distribute for themselves 2 and 3 congressional districts. And then they put, let's say, they put all the Republicans in one district, 90% of them in one district. Well, they get one district. But if you distribute it correctly, you can get more districts. That's packing. So there are all these different types of voter suppression techniques that go back to the 19th century. And we're still going through it right now.
Thank you, Jaime. So in regards to what you were saying, as far as solutions, do you think bringing more resources to local elections would help alleviate, and like what kind of resources do you think could help alleviate this situation, if that would help?
Well, it basically goes back to legislation and making sure that that legislation is basically protected and implemented correctly. So you need to understand the legislation. You need to understand the electoral votes and regulations and things like that in order to protect the vote. But the most important thing is voting participation. So even if you have to wait for 4 hours, that unfortunately, that's what you have to do. So you have to fight. This is a war, guys. You know, this is a war. This is, and it's not a new war. So we have to be pushing constantly for that. This is why this project of social work votes is so important.
Right.
You know, because we are going to be protecting the vote. We're going to have a training in September in which we're going to go through all these techniques to protect the vote, to encourage the vote, to get out the vote, and voting rights, etc. That's going to be at the end of September. We're going to do that at Columbia, and hopefully we're going to transmit all this training and information to other schools of social work where the students can train themselves. And Columbia is taking the leadership on this. And I think this is the first time that something like this happened. By the way, congratulate you in the podcast. This is student oriented.
Thank
you know, few students are doing this in the United States. So, you know, we're breaking ground.
Yeah, so in regards to the training that you've mentioned, how do you think that this impacts the COVID-19 situation in terms of just like anyone really turning out, like who have been impacted by COVID-19, and how social workers, if you think they should be out there, how can they kind of help support this?
Well, that's a good question. Very, you know, and I'm sorry I didn't remember this, so thank you. Basically, voting by mail. That's something new. It's not completely new, but everybody's talking about it. Like I have my paperwork here ready to mail it for a primary here in New York that we have in 2 weeks. So that's a way of participating without being affected by the pandemic. Now, if legislation is created that says we are not going to accept any votes by mailing in this state, you see, that's policy, that's legislation. And who created the legislation? People who are elected. And who are the people who are elected? It's people who have belongs to different parties, to different ideologies. So you need to select what works for you and for your community. But voting is the power that allows you to create the policies that benefit you and your community.
Yeah, thank you. So many of us will see this issue in Georgia as a reason not to go out to vote. Is this what we should take from this? Like, what do you think we can take from this? As our history shows, there has been like voter suppression around.
I forgot to mention before that one of the things that we should do is to train people as poll watchers, right, to work inside the polling site and making sure that the process is accelerated inside and that people are not turned down to vote. And if they find out that they have to go to another place, that they have the listings of the other poll sites with the address. If we had money, we could have buses or vans that will take people to other places when they find out that the poll sites have been changed. But that's a big operation. However, training poll watchers is extremely important, outside and inside, because you can go through the line of people waiting and making sure that they are in the right place. And if they are not in the right place, then send them to the right place and have a vehicle to make sure that they get there. Now, campaigns do that. That doesn't mean that non-partisan groups like us, because we operate from a non-partisan perspective, that can do the same. You send, if it's a Republican, you send them to the poll site. If it's a Democrat, you send them to the other poll site, and you make sure that it's equal. What we're interested is that the voting rights process is, the voting access process is respected. And that's what we are supposed to be doing. But we need to have training, and if we had money, we will be able to do those things. But you know, that's, I think that in the future we should have a non-partisan PAC in which we can put monies, or even a 501c3 where we can put monies in order to help in terms of voting, which is something that social workers were not that good at. You know, raising monies. We're willing to die for anything. But we have a problem raising monies because sometimes it's too corporate, or, you know, we cannot be that idealistic all the time.
Right. Thank you. Danielle or Sarah, do you have anything to add onto this topic or anything Jaime has brought up?
No, I think I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to add is that the right to vote in the United States doesn't exist at the federal level. The right to vote. The Constitution gives that right to the states. So every state can regulate the vote the way they want to. So, and that comes from the Constitution. The issue of democracy is still an issue, whether the United States is a democracy or not. The United States is a republic. The majority of the vote for president, there is more democracy at the local level in general, in terms of the Constitution, than at the federal level. That was given to the states. But the reality is that the electoral colleges You know, you can have 5 million votes more than the other candidates, so the majority doesn't count. It's basically electoral colleges. And the reason the founders created the electoral colleges was because they didn't believe in the wisdom of the majority. If you read, I mean, from Adams to Madison, Hamilton, James Monroe, all of them, you can find, and those that took legal foundation with me, I show you, Danielle did, all the statements that they made against democracy. Plainly, they didn't believe in democracy because the excuse that they used was basically that the people were not educated enough in order to make a right decision. The people that were educated enough were the elites, the white elites. That's why they created electoral colleges to keep that power. They even discriminated against white, poor, and working people during those times because they didn't trust them. Also, there is this issue of the fact that the revolution was fought by the people, you know? So they needed to create something that looks like a democracy, but it wasn't really a democracy, you know? So
we're definitely fighting an uphill battle here.
yeah, well, the composition of the House of Representatives and the Senate, you know, the Senate is called the biggest white men's club for many years. Now I think there is only one African American male, two African American male in the Senate. Things have been changing a little, but the reason why the Senate is so important is because they made it important, and then the concession to the people was to create the House of Representatives. You know, but the House of Representatives, you have to get elected every 2 years. The Senate is every 6 years, where they can be longer. The Supreme Court of the United States has the last word. So who was the Supreme Court? Who is the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court are the elites, the lawyers during those times that will make the decision, the final decision. Mm-hmm. So they knew what they were doing.
Yeah. Oh, Danielle, I think you're still Yeah, there you go. Okay. Wow. Yeah. A lot of heavy stuff.
You gave us a lot to think about and contributed a lot to our conversation today, Jaime. So I want to thank you for all of the insight and information that you brought to us and social workers and others who are looking to be participating in the voting that's happening. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Jaime, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Anytime, and congratulations for the job that you are doing with the podcast and the newsletter. You are ahead of the curve. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.